Hello. Happy Tuesday. Welcome. Thank you. How are you doing? So we'll just wait for a few moments for people to join, and of course, Kira. So while we're waiting, how about you tell me where you're joining in from tonight? Where's everyone tuning in from? Thank you. Appreciate that. Where's everyone coming in from? Hi. Welcome to tonight's conversation. Ashtanga Yoga Natal. Very cool. Brazil in the house. Hi Camille. Hi. Welcome everyone. While we wait for Kira to come, please put in the... Okay, Sweden, Spain. Awesome. Tell me where you are coming in from this day. It's a gray day here on Sami land or Helsinki, Finland. And we're just about to go live with Kira, just waiting for her to hop on. Yeah, you need to, did you get like a request to, it said like something popped up saying request to join the live, Kira, did you get that? Go live with, oh, okay, here we go. I sent you I think Colombian and Netherlands. Okay, I just posted. Yes, hello.
Hi. I just got it.
Awesome! Yay! How are you?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
I'm well. Been actually, it's funny because when somebody asks how you are, it's like you just go through the condition of response. I'm fine, how are you? But if I were to be actually really honest, I would say like I'm actually really tired and heavy and going through a little bit of I guess the feeling is grief, to be honest.
Oh.
Mainly because yesterday I wasn't boundaried enough and I watched too much of the news. So
Oh, okay.
You know how it is.
I just don't. So, boundaries are big for me. That's how I survive.
Boundaries are extremely important. It's good to be informed with what's going on, but when it begins to consume your life force, then we need to rethink those boundaries.
For sure.
But I'm super excited about tonight's conversation.
Yeah.
So welcome everyone. We were just kind of waiting for folks to join and seeing where people are from. We have people from all over. So before we begin, I just want to, I have some candles lit here in the yoga space, just to take a moment of silence, just to pay respects to all those fallen as a result of this ongoing global pandemic, as well as just the ongoing quest for human rights. I'm not even really calling it a social justice issue because it's really a human rights issue when we're talking about all Black lives globally, all Black lives mattering.
Yeah.
So if you don't mind, if you just might join me in just a moment of just sitting and being still or rocking just gently. Nice. And if you are ready to, if your eyes have been closed, ready to open them, and we can begin with this settled, grounded, hopefully, place. So welcome everyone to tonight's IG Live. I'm so honored and excited to be hosting Kira, my Jamaican Ashtangi practitioner. We actually haven't met in person, but we've been in touch via email for some years because I was like, girl, trying to get to Jamaica.
Let's get it together.
Let's make it happen.
Yeah.
So Kira, before we begin into the main part of our conversation, actually, and I apologize for this, I forgot to print out your bio and introduce you. So if you might perhaps just introduce yourself, okay, so folks know who you are and where you're coming from, and then we'll get into our conversation.
Sure. You and many other people know me in the yoga space as Kira. My full name is Shakira. Yes.
Well, which do you prefer?
So I'm Shakira Williams-Boer.
Which do you prefer, Shakira or Kira?
I don't care. Anything but Shak with a Q on the end. Anything but that. Shaks, Kira, Kiki, anything like that, I'm fine with.
Awesome. I love Shakira. What a beautiful name. My goodness.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I was actually named after, so my parents had a child that before me that unfortunately passed away tragically, and he was Shaka. And so my parents were looking for something that was reminiscent, as I'm a rainbow child. And so they gave me Shakira, and I was actually also named after Michael Caine's wife, who was Guyanese.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful name. Yeah.
Thank you. So I'm an Ashtanga practitioner, and I've been a yoga lover and student and teacher. I think I took my very first yoga class in 1999. So that tells you already how old I am. And then I am 5 trips authorized level 1 with Sharachi, practicing in and out of 2nd series, wanting to finish it and do it properly, because but also I've been teaching maybe for the last 13 years and full-time for the past 9, but not Ashtanga.
In Jamaica?
6 years. In Jamaica, although I have been able to sub, I have done a sub in the States once. That was maybe about 6 years ago. And I also did, I was also part of a yoga festival in the Bahamas.
Oh, nice.
So just small things, but definitely mostly Jamaica. Yeah.
And where in Jamaica are you situated?
In Kingston. I'm in the capital. Yeah.
You're born and raised?
Born in Montego Bay, so born on the other end of the island. Okay. But for the most part, just like you would imagine, I would imagine for Nairobi, most people, whether or not they're from Kingston, they tend to move to or around Kingston.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful.
And so that's it. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I'm just so happy to have you here. And before this, obviously, COVID-19 just put a halt on all travel plans. We've been in communication about how to get
to work together.
The island. And so, okay, so we have lots of rich, deep topics to get into. And if we don't get into all of them today, that is absolutely not a problem. We can always do a part 2 of this. So I know you were keen, Kira, to talk about Ashtanga Yoga, or maybe just yoga in general, and quite literally the black body. And I put it in parentheses because, you know, there's going to be, we're not a monolith. We don't all have one body type. But it's definitely a rich topic that I don't think is really talked about enough. So when you... so what are your thoughts on this? Why this topic? I mean, I have thoughts too, but I want to kind of like...
I think 2 reasons that really come up for me when I think of Ashtanga and the black body is because of one, representation, and two, some of the reasons that underlie representation or the lack thereof. When I remember the first video that I saw on YouTube, I think this would have been maybe about in 2008. No, lie. Maybe 2007 or 2008 that I saw that was about Ashtanga. It was a white dude in an Indian temple doing amazing asana. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. This is really cool. But it never occurred to me at the time that what I was looking at was one perspective on Ashtanga, and what has become pervasively the most seen, the most preponderant view of Ashtanga Yoga has been that it's something. And even when you think of yoga, at least certainly what it was presented to me in Jamaica at first was that it was something that people of privilege did. Yeah. So with that connection, it's not surprising that it's just now, and certainly now because Laruga is bringing things up. And if you listen to Shayna, like when Shayna talks, Wellness Yogini, she's been talking about stuff like this for a while. This isn't new, but it's as Laruga said, I think in the last chat, the one with me, not the one with Corey that she did, she talked about, you know how sometimes you see something goes past you until you see it for yourself. And then when you see it, you can't help but see it everywhere you go. Or if it finally comes up in your consciousness, now you really are seeing examples of it everywhere that you look.
The pattern.
Yeah, for sure. You're seeing the patterns, you're seeing everything everywhere. You see it because it all matters to you. And because it all matters to you, you're wondering if does anyone else see this? Am I by myself? Am I the only one who's noticing how this looks or how it feels? Yeah. And I think the next piece of it is the physical black body. It's what I think of when I think of the asanas. When I think of representation of the asanas, I mean, to think of like people like Jessamine, I am Jessamine, right? Just think of Jessamine's amazing, big, fluffy, gorgeous body, and that not being seen as yogic. So much so that Yoga Journal wasn't prepared to really bet on her, and they split the difference. And I mean, all respect to Mati Israti, right? She was an amazing pioneer for women in Ashtanga. But there was that moment, and Yoga Journal slipped. I think they thought this isn't gonna sell because nobody really wants to see this big, black woman doing yoga when that's exactly what we need to see.
Absolutely.
You know, what we want and what we need are sometimes two totally different things.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. And for me also, not only as a practitioner but also as somebody who's teaching, it really came like into my face when I began to have classes for POC in Helsinki, and then folks were coming in with bigger hips and chests as well, and then I needed to find alternatives to certain poses, and I was like, oh my goodness, I actually don't know what to do.
Exactly.
And I'm glad you brought up Shayna, because I just took a Making Ashtanga Accessible course with her last month.
Nice.
And she's also studied with Diane Bondi, who's another but I think she's Black Canadian, abundantly sized yoga practitioner and teacher who's making it. Yeah. So, and then there were like different tips to offer so people can do the pose, because not just, just skip it or sit down, like that's not very skillful teaching.
Right.
And even just like the cues, I remember we did a summit, Celebrating Yoga in Africa summit, and one sister from Nigeria was saying like this whole thing of like tucking your tailbone in order to get the lower back on the floor. I mean, if you look at like the shape of some of us, like the lower back is like this beautiful curve, and then we have like,
and then we have this one that, we got a bottom.
Yeah, so these kinds of cues, which folks might think are neutral and objective, actually are incredibly like riddled and laced in
Yes.
A certain kind of
Assumption.
supremacy. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So what would you hope then in order to kind of make these spaces safer and more accessible for all kinds of different body types? What might you, as somebody holding the space, hope could be made a bit differently?
I think I love that question. And I remember when I first started teaching, it's just, I had the same experience you did. And when I first started teaching, I had a girl coming to, because I'm, as a Black woman in Jamaica, so now my experience is every other person I see out there looks like me. We have, our motto is out of many one, but it's about 92% Black. We have a white community, we have an Indian community, we have a Chinese community, and then we have a lot of intermarriage, and there's every shade, right? But there, you know, there's largely women with big breasts and big bottoms and curves, and fluffy women, you know. We call them fluffy, I love abundantly sized.
I love that. I love that. I heard it when we left voice messages. It's beautiful.
I love it.
Yes.
And it's just absolutely brilliant. And I remember her telling me that downward facing, there's one girl came into my class and she was like, downward facing dog. I would talk about how downward facing dog was a rest pose. That's what I used to say, right? This was in a vinyasa class. And she was just like, I'm sorry, with my body, there's no way downward facing dog is a rest pose. All I can feel is the pain in my wrists. All I can feel is my belly pulling me down. All I can feel is my hips. And it's like, you're not understanding. And I could not for the longest time understand how to help her. What did I need to say in terms of my cueing so that it was, one, inclusive, and two, not problematic or stigmatizing. You know what I mean? Just in the way that you learn how to, when we think of expanding the voices to include LGBTQIA people, we are also thinking about it from the perspective of, if you can't touch this, if you can't twist all the way, because I'm thinking now, if I ask someone to do Marichas in a C and you have a G cup, because I've had that, there's no way I'm going to get you to get into this deepest express. It's just not possible. It's not comfortable. They'll tell you their ribs feel blocked off and they can't breathe. So I think the sequence, not the sequencing, because the sequence is fine. It's the way that we introduce the postures. It's the way that we build them from the foundation. It's the language that we use.
Absolutely.
And it's our bodies being welcoming. It's not, oh crap. You know, when you see someone come into the studio, it has to be this feeling of, I don't care what you look like. I recognize, if we talk about this idea, not to appropriate the word namaste right now, but if we acknowledge that namaste means the divine in me, or whatever we consider the divine, the connection to this Ishvara, connecting to you, then when someone comes into my space as a student and as a teacher to me, and that's what I need to learn, I have to think, this is another spirit, quote unquote, sharing this space with me, and what can I learn from you, because your experience, your body is different to mine. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If we create that welcoming space, then we can't go wrong. We really, really can't go wrong.
Absolutely. And you know, I'm currently, I mean, yoga in itself as an indigenous practice is trauma informed, especially in like a Mysore style class where people can listen to the rhythm of their own breath and body and move at their own pace. But one thing I'm doing right now is taking a certification for trauma conscious yoga. And the point you brought about the languaging is super important, where we reduce the sense of hierarchy in the poses.
Yeah.
Like, this is the pose and how it's actually supposed to be, but if you can't do that, do this instead. But that in the mind is just
that
like,
leaves a sense of inadequateness. Yeah, for sure. That, I think that leaves a sense of inadequateness. But if you flip,
the value judgment. So it's really just offering, like, I don't even like say modifications and variations anymore. It's like there's one option, here's another option, here's another option, you do and choose from, and really just getting sensitive to the fact that, you know, it's just like a natural tendency of the human ego. If something is kind of showcased as the thing, but always kind of have that little voice in my head like, oh wow, so reducing that sense of pressure that something is less than or not quite it, I think is going to be key to creating a more welcoming and accessible, friendly class for people to come in as they are.
I completely agree. I think you, as you said it, when you talked about the I even joke about it now, and I think what I've started to do with my teaching is reverse it. I start from the quote unquote basic movement.
Me too.
I say, let's start from this position. If you want, we're gonna go from this twist. If you feel like going deeper, then we can go this way. And then and then I'll go the so-called just for clarity and completeness. This is what the so-called final version of the pose looks like, because I don't want to lie. But you have to pay attention to what your breath tells you. I think there's a really beautiful, Khalil Gibran talks about teaching in his book, The Prophet, which is like my all-time favorite book. I quote it all the time. And in one of his things, he says, if the teacher, if he is wise, he does not lead you to the threshold of his wisdom, but rather to the threshold of your own mind. Our job when we are holding space for students in asana is to help them figure it out. We are the ones who understand the rules, so we can understand the rules, so we can understand how to teach the rules. I remember how Laruga talks about you have to know what the rules are before you break them. And
well, honey, I think she could probably stand to break a few, because she knows the rules so well.
She's gonna cuss us for this.
What you say?
She's gonna cuss us for that. But
it's so loud. I'm just saying, like,
no, it's love.
It's so like,
Yeah, it is, and it can be that way. But at the same time, it doesn't have to be. And Ashtanga can be a tremendously nurturing thing, and but it's not. It's not shown that way. And so I think to come to the next point is to say that how we represent it in terms of social media sharing must fit.
Totally. Yeah. The representation is huge, and normalizing things. Like, I remember in Shayna's class, we talked about, like, you know, I mean, we were using chairs and we were using the wall to do different sun salutations. And it was like, do we have a special class called Accessible Ashtanga Yoga where maybe older practitioners come in, or folks that are having an injury and using the practice as, you know, recovery from injury? Do we have like a separate class, or are we trying to have it like in the kind of mainstream class itself? And we all agreed, or we both agreed, that it would be nice to normalize different kinds of practices. And at the same time, it is going to be a process, because, you know, there's also the sense of, like, I think folks coming into like a Mysore class where somebody's doing third series and then you're there in your chair, it might be a little bit like, we would maybe need to consider a safer space. But totally, like, it would be amazing to have, like, just that it's all normalized and people are there like doing their thing, and it's no thing, right?
Well, what's interesting is, if you remember, I don't know if you've seen this in Mysore, back in, not in the old Shala, so not where Sharaji has his classes now, but where it used to be, right across where we used to practice. If you had to go there in the afternoons for chanting, or you had to go to the office or something, sometimes he was teaching locals class, and on the same space, and I would just be like, but hold on a second. This is just, it's not all us. We have to recognize those of us who get to go to Mysore and get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and take practice and like stretch our bodies and practice second and third series. That is a huge privilege, right?
Huge.
But it's huge. And then when I see the people, like the quote unquote normal people
coming in with Sharat and doing class in the afternoon, I was just like, why are they? I mean, maybe the time is a problem, but I didn't understand why they were separated from us. Maybe in his mind, he was thinking it's the same thing, you know, teach the people who come specifically in the morning, coming from all over the place in the morning, and then I'll teach the locals because they have the time. We can work out a different time frame in the afternoon. But I always thought, now when I watched them practice, it was nothing like the stop time, float through kind of practices that we do. And so what we've done though is that we've done Ashtanga a disservice by showing people that that's what asana should look like. There's nothing wrong.
Or the only thing
you should do. I love having the moments when I can cultivate that floaty quality, when everything feels like effortless effort. That's a wonderful day. But equally as wonderful is if I've had to struggle through a pose and I still came out the other side. And it's still all practice. And that's why Sharat says there's no such thing as a bad practice. There's just good practice. There's just practice. And if we get people to just practice, then, you know, then we're gone clear. We've already done the thing, but we absolutely have to change the feeling people have when they come into the shala, how they feel supported by teachers of color, not feeling like they have to fall in line with Western or Eurocentric modes of acceptability, respectability, and beauty. And then we have to also accept their bodies as they are. Whether or not they change after that is it's not about us anymore. We are here to hold space so that the practice can be the teacher. That's what the opening mantra says. It is about changing. It's about changing yourself from the inside. Nothing more, nothing less.
That's right. That's right. One of the quotes that I really love about Iyengar, and Iyengar was a huge proponent of asana. You know, he was all about I mean, I really think and I was just with back about Laruga breaking the rules. there's a similar energy. I really get the sense that, you know, with Iyengar and watching someone like Laruga practice, it's really you can really see that they are accessing the divine through the physical body is the conduit towards it. And that you know, Iyengar, I mean, he was I mean, we don't have just aside from the problematic side of things, I mean, he was a tiger when it came to asana, but for the purpose of polishing and polishing and polishing, and then coming through on the other side. And he said, why does he practice yoga? He practices yoga so he can have a good death. That was his why. And that to me, you know, we can't take this beautiful asana with us onto the other side. So it's all just kind of preparation in a way.
Right. Well, the whole thing is about finding the stillness in the mind and the purity and oneness that we view. I come back to the sutras, I come back to the seer abiding in his or her own nature, you know, and it's right at the beginning. And when
or their own nature.
Sorry, thank you. Or their own nature. It's right at the beginning of the Yoga Sutras, and it's also encapsulates what we need. When you look at all 4 books of the sutras, and you look at how many verses actually focus on asana, compared to the very few, I think maybe 3 or 4, something like that. And I think of one of my favorite other sutras that says, Abhyasa Vairagabhyam Tat Nirodha, which is the practice is achieved through it's still yoga is achieved through practice and non-attachment.
That's right.
So what if we don't attach ourselves to the way our bodies look? What if we don't attach ourselves to the size and shape of them and the color of them, and we allow ourselves to just to follow the practice, just to follow and listen to the breath and allow that to be the healing. I think that for me, that has been the biggest thing. And so that's how I segue into how I convince Jamaicans largely to because you know we have to get into it, to have the conversation about having a yoga practice or an asana practice, or allowing yoga to be a spiritual companion, if you will. If you're abiding Christian, if you're a practicing Christian, particularly in Jamaica, where the assumption is that you're a Christian. It's when I talk about that, I'm going to say some things that you're going to be shocked by. Almost every government assembly is begun with a prayer.
Yeah.
Or national anthem, not so surprising. Or
not national
at all. Anthem is a prayer. People just assume you believe in God. They don't ask the questions, and they assume the God you believe in is Jesus. So there's automatically that assumption. It doesn't leave much room unless you are. I mean, I've gotten Empress a couple times because, of course, the locks. People associate the locks with being Rastafari. I am not. And there's that assumption that as long if you're not demonstrably Muslim or Rastafari or Jewish by, you know, maybe wearing a yarmulke or the way that you dress, that you're automatically a believing Christian. And for a lot of people, coming into the space of a yoga practice is very difficult. They find it problematic because they feel somewhere in there that their focus should be, everything that they do should be to the glory of God.
Okay, so
there's no conflict here, because if you are tending to your temple in this way, absolutely. And if you are, you know, I'm trying to remember where, and I should have looked it up last night because I really wanted to find the exact verse. I used to know my Bible back to back because that's how I was raised.
Okay.
But be still and know that I am God. And the contemplation of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane the night before he was put to the cross. You know, in these stories, however we believe them, if we see them as parable or truth or myth, the point is that there's an underlying point about meditation. There's a point about stillness and waiting for something. And then an understanding that I can achieve something through stillness. Now, that's all that we're talking about when we talk about meditation, right? But there are a lot of people who struggle with that.
So, and I'm just so curious about this because I had a talk last year with some young African sisters here in Finland regarding this, and the same idea. They were from West Africa. I can't quite remember the country, but it was the same idea that like, no, this is like some kind of like witchcraft. This is some kind of like, some kind of like weird worship of
Eastern Spiritism. I've heard it referred to.
Yeah, something that is not quite like that is a little too like. So how do you work around that? Like, in the context of Jamaica itself?
All right, so when I'm unless I am teaching Ashtanga, Mysore, or a counted guided class, I don't chant.
Okay.
Right? I don't chant, and I don't use a lot of Sanskrit at first.
Okay.
I feel when for two reasons. One, I don't want people thinking I'm telling them or if I use a Sanskrit term, I immediately explain what it means. So I'll say Padangustasana. I'll be like, you know what Padangustasana means? Pada is foot and Gusta is your thumb. So the thumb of your foot is what? Your big toe. People go, oh, you know?
Yeah.
And so they connect to it. So I'm just like, half the times the poses are just describing what you have to do, right? Nothing more, nothing less. I don't chant, and when I used to teach corporate classes, so at one point I was teaching 5 corporate classes a week, but a lot of that's gone, and certainly with COVID that doesn't exist anymore, right? I do not teach, I don't present the spiritual aspects because a lot of people still are just like, look, I'm just looking for a stretch after the office. After the rough day, I just want to stretch. And I have taken the decision that I am like, okay, fine. I will present it to you in this way, and I will use minimal Sanskrit, and I will, but I'm teaching them the same thing. Half of the people I know can go through that I teach in a corporate setting can do sun salutations A and B and all of standing without knowing why. they do it. And the yoga works on them regardless, right?
And do you find that then they get interested and transition into your more
well,
complete...
I was just gonna say that. Those, it's almost like, I'm gonna bring it back to parables. The reason when I remember going to Sunday school and when I became a Catholic, how we were told that Jesus used parables to kind of like teach those who wanted, let those who have ears to hear. And it's the same thing when I come into the space. I've had people say, you know what? I really love when you use this word. I'm really interested in the mindfulness aspect of the yoga practice. Someone else said to me, do you know the Gayatri mantra? Because she was half Christian, half Hindu through her parents here, an Indian girl. So I meet people where they're at. That's it.
That's exactly right. And I think like it was the same question I gave last year when I was having this conversation with sisters from Africa. My job is not to convince you why you should do something. It's like if you're like happy with your Christian worship and your calisthenics and stretching class, great, do that. Like that's awesome. And it was funny because I just took this Yoga is Dead. You're familiar with the Yoga is Dead?
Oh God, the Yoga is Dead podcast.
They're awesome. So last week I took their Act Against Appropriation workshop, which was fabulous. Shout out to Jaisal and Tejo for the amazing work you do. And they brought a good point about, you know, how the whole yoga in schools in the US has really been like a bit of a cluster bomb. And mainly because there was such like opposition, like no this, no that, none of this, none of that. And so it was to the point where it was like, well, that's actually then not going to really be like yoga anymore. And so might as well so if you want to like do some calisthenics and stretching and some kind of like quiet time to just sit, then that's cool, but don't call something yoga. Like yoga when it's actually removed like so many of the elements from which it came from. And I think that's an important point. But
it's a balancing act, isn't it?
What you say?
Sorry, it's a balancing act, isn't it? Because on the one hand, you want to take out anything that feels too esoteric, anything that feels too difficult, quote unquote, at first. Right. Because when I first started practicing yoga, it was not because I wanted to become a more peaceful person. Yeah. It was because I wanted to become more flexible. That's all it was. But why I stayed, that's another thing that LaRuga said, and I was like, absolutely. The reason I stayed was because I was like, wow, I'm a nicer person.
Yeah, I mean, it reveals itself to you. It reveals itself to you, and it works on you, and you begin to see like there's actually like nothing has to be like at odds with the thing.
Exactly.
So one thing I'm dying to get into. Yoga in a place like Jamaica, which is predominantly black. And versus yoga in a place which is predominantly white, like Finland, where I'm at. I would love for us just to exchange notes on that and what we might learn and share with each other. So
if you're speaking about Ashtanga in particular, because I can expand it, and something came up in my mind that I would love to talk about. If you're just talking about Ashtanga, I think I'm the only authorized person in the Caribbean, but there are other people who know bits and pieces of Ashtanga and they teach it, and their value is just as much as anyone else's, and that's wonderful. And so like when they teach bits and pieces of the practice, you definitely feel it's the same kind of thing. People are at first quite careful in some spaces. In public spaces, people are quite careful. There is a group called the Art of Living that has Art of Living. Have you heard of it? Mm-hmm. Right. So
the local representative had, they used to organize they didn't do it this year for obvious reasons, but on June 21st, which is International Yoga Day, what they typically would do is do like this, you rent out the national stadium and then have a big free yoga class to get as many people that would not normally. So now Jamaica is tremendously socially stratified, and because human beings must find a way to separate themselves. So if you're not going to do it on color, let's do it
class.
Let's take the plantation model of the way things live. Exactly, it is. We're going to take the plantation model as it existed 200 years ago, and now instead of it being about color, it's going to be about money. And so the people who sit at the top, and invariably, of course, there is also that there is colorism, and within Black societies, there is colorism, and you'll see fair-skinned people towards the top. There's this assumption that no one in Jamaica can be white and poor. Yeah, man, seriously, I'm gonna be very blunt.
Great, I love it. I'm all
so
about
much so that
here.
I have a friend who is white who complains. She's just like, she works as a groomer, and she's just like, people just ignore me and ignore my opinions completely because I'm white. Now I'm like, look, it's difficult. A lot of people just don't see it every day. It's not that you're being ignored per se. It's just that I think people feel it's enough now. They want other voices to be heard, and it sucks to be in a position where you appear to be on the wrong side of history. Those things kind of get difficult. But in Jamaica, when I started practicing yoga 20 years ago, it was definitely a thing that it was the trendy thing to do. We had teachers that would come down from the States and teach us, and for whatever great value we got out of it, there still was left the idea that it was just for the jet set or the ladies' school lunch. And I'm trying not to be very careful here, because a lot of these people are great people, and it's not their circumstance per se that they live through. It's just what we've at first been exposed to within this Jamaican context, and how they've chosen and seen their way through the practice coming from that. I hope that made sense. But certainly this idea that yoga was for the privileged, and I was told not too far after I'd started practicing it that yoga isn't for Black people.
It's not.
It's not for Black people, and to hear that in a country where every other person, I'm just like, so who am I? What am I? In other words, I was trying to exercise proximity to whiteness by practicing yoga. I was trying to exercise proximity to privilege by practicing yoga. It had nothing to do with anything that I enjoyed. But now, that was 20 years ago. A lot has changed since then. And something that has come out of it is, how much do you know about kinetic yoga?
A little bit. I'm learning a bit more. Yeah.
Right. So with kinetic, I have a couple of friends who teach it and practice it. So it, like Ashtanga, it's it's sets of sequences.
Right.
But it's based on this idea that rather than India, yoga originated in Kemet or Egypt, right? Now, I'm not here to argue about where yoga came from, but I certainly understand the value of connecting with Kemet, connecting with Africa in this way, connecting with Blackness in this way. And so a lot of the people whom I see practicing and teaching Kemetic yoga are dark-skinned, dreadlocked Black people who are like, I am a proud Black person. I am proud of my skin color. I am proud of who I am, where I've come from. And this is a way that I can experience all those things that yoga promises to me while reinforcing my Blackness as part of my identity. And that is powerful. And so from that perspective, I've taken a couple of those classes. It's not, to me, it's not for me personally, because I expect something a little bit more. I want a little bit more. And I love Ashtanga and Vinyasa. And I find it's a little bit slower in energy for me personally. Let me be clear. But I love it. I love to watch the Kemetic practitioners perform it.
I can see them drop into that yoga chitta vritti nirodha. I can see that.
Absolutely.
I can see the sutras happening in them, just as you described Laruga and just as you described Iyengar. And I can see also that there's this pride. And
Absolutely.
there's nothing, there's no way am I taking that away from anyone else.
Right. No, that's beautiful. I love that you brought up Kemet. And I mean, if we think back, like, again, like we're not going to get into a debate on the origins of yoga. There's lots of research that we need to do about that from very different, multiple views.
For sure.
However, if we just start with the assumption or the agreement that yoga is an indigenous practice, and we as people of the African continent, of also the South Asian part of the continent, are indigenous peoples, then it's not a huge leap to say that there would be body, mind, spirit practices looking similar to different ones. You know what I'm saying?
Yep. It's really hot here.
Bring some of that over here. But and you know, for me, like, if I can just now circle it back to being in a Nordic country where Afro-Finns and African diaspora people are very much on the minority side of things. One thing that I'm kind of really like trying to create a consciousness around is and just being in this climate of Black Lives Matter, is having like BIPOC only healing spaces and yoga spaces where we might get together and be able to just work through healing modalities, where we don't have to negotiate
with, you don't have to
the dynamics,
and you don't have to change your language, and you don't have to
code switch. You don't, you know, so because I really think like just being held and having somebody that looks like you or has closer proximity to you, it's an extremely powerful thing that you don't know it's what you need until you get it.
Until you get it, and you're just like, oh,
you know what I'm saying? Where you feel seen and just nourished and heard in a way, and you know you don't have to like explain, like, actually no, don't touch my hair, and you know, you don't have to perform in any way, and you know you're not going to be tolerated in a space, but you're actually going to be celebrated, and like people are going to be happy to see you, and like just giving life to one another. That's my wish and my hope and my aspiration while I'm here in Finland. So if you're in Helsinki and you like the sound of that, go ahead and give some hearts.
I have a question for you. When you talk about this because you like, I would love to, you like, I'm married to a white man, you are married to a white man, you have children, I don't, but when you have conversations with the white people in your lives about why specific to yoga. Now, I'm not talking about George Floyd, and I'm not talking about Breonna Taylor. I'm talking about with respect to yoga. And how do you feel, because it's so important, even though I remember, so I had an experience. Let me just share this really quickly. In the last 2 yoga posts that I've had on my Instagram, I talk about locks, right? Because there's been this big deal about this judgment here in Jamaica. And a lot of the kerfluffle, and so I posted about, you know, just loving my locks, and I received a gem in my Instagram inbox. Oh, you saw that? You saw it on my Facebook, did you?
I did, but just remind for folks who haven't.
I'm certainly not going to repeat the words that were said, but slurs as to my skin tone and likening me to another primate were mentioned, right? And
I actually haven't seen that yet.
Oh,
yeah,
it's on my Facebook. If you're with me on Facebook, you can see it, and I'll share it with you.
Okay.
And I remember how I felt, and I was just like, this is how sad. How sad is that this is how threatened you feel, that some random person on the internet who has nothing to do with you is just expressing pride over something in herself, and you feel so threatened or so idle basically, that you feel that this is the way, this is the violence you need to do. And so when I spoke about that, on one of my friends, a brethren from Germany was just like, it's not your job to have to clean them up or to have to heal these people. And so
absolutely not.
He was very clear. He was just like, I'm so sorry, you're right to be angry. And I'm like, you know what? Anger for me comes back to that whole thing about boundaries. Anger, because of how terrible my temper is a road that I don't want to go down on. But because I say to myself, I know this has nothing, I don't need to center myself in someone else's sad drama that has nothing to do with me. But it's important for the white folks in our lives who love us and whom we love to understand that while our job is to talk and exist and do the work, that it is for them to also do the work. It is for them to do the healing as well. And if they don't do that, and I'm very grateful for the person I'm married to, because he was just like, look, this is difficult stuff. And I'm just like, absolutely. And we're going to have uncomfortable conversations.
It's difficult stuff for you to learn. Imagine how difficult
it is for people to
like
live
live
every single day. One way, do you know that until I married my husband, every time I traveled to the United States, they would search my hair.
I well believe it. I well believe it.
And the minute they saw me coming in with a white man through immigration, well, maybe because I'm Jamaican, and of course Jamaica is automatically drugs, right? But this idea that proximity to whiteness makes you safe, it should not be that way. And
Absolutely.
that's what we're trying to do, is to combat that in every single milieu in which it exists, and yoga is no different. Absolutely. And that's why I get real heated, because I'm like, what upsets me is when people go, positive vibes only, love and light. And I'm just like, basically what you're telling me is that my life, the difficulties that we go through every single day, are not important for you to feel a little bit uncomfortable and do this work.
Basically what you're saying is, you're bumming out my bliss and I don't want to hear it.
Right.
So what was your question, Kira?
So my question for you is, how do you navigate the spaces in being in a white majority country? And then I remember listening to you and Laruga. Was it you and Laruga? And you were saying that sadly Finland is the most xenophobic of the European countries.
There's some graphs I posted a while back, and you can, yes, there's it came out in 2018 or 2019 as the most racist in, is it the EU? Or if somebody is here and can just verify that for me, it came out at the top of that. So how do I navigate? Boundaries. I was just talking with a friend before we met. By the way, she's the Chindian queen. She makes these earrings. I promised I'd give a shout out. So go follow her. And if you're in Helsinki, you can order these beautiful beads and earrings. So that's the Chindian queen. Shout out to Tanya. Shout out to Aquilina as well, who is performing poetry as we speak right now. She's going to be in a couple weeks here. So anyway, just some fun stuff that's happening in the pop community here. Boundaries. But, you know, I basically told my husband that you and our two boys who are fair, and we're going to run out of time soon. So just to be aware of that. Right. You are the only white person who I'm going to invest emotional labor in terms of educating and doing this thing for free. Dang. Granted, I do a lot of work on Instagram. I share stuff on Instagram, but it's just something that I've made very concrete in myself, that I only have the emotional capacity for you, because it's also gonna like depend how our children are raised, and I need your help in order to raise these kids up well, so they don't inherit this sense of superiority as a result of this environment in which they are in. Right. So it's meant that we've had to sit down and do parenting and white supremacy, you know, Layla Saad's webinar together. It's meant we've had to sit down, and oh my gosh, it's been a year of like hard dark night of the soul discomfort.
Difficult conversation.
I'm telling you, but it's because there's a lot at stake here. It's not just our relationship, it's also like how we are gonna bring up these boys, and it's just like, I need you on board because I am not going to be able to hold it all alone for them.
Right.
And you know, it takes, it's fits and starts. It's like, but thankfully he's a resilient person. He's like not afraid to be uncomfortable and to go there, but it's definitely a process. It's a lot of unpacking. It's a lot of
absolutely
unpacking.
Let me also be clear, like I my husband is South African.
Okay, I was just gonna ask. Yeah.
Yes.
Wow.
And, yeah, okay. And
that's a project.
And he's Afrikaans, so not just English speaking. My husband's Afrikaans. Yes. So it's been, but man, if it's somebody who, I have to big up my husband, honestly, not just because he's a good person, and yet he can have even when it sucks and you can see him just like, why do we have to talk about this now? Can't we just have a nice evening together, please? And I'm just like, but we have to talk about this because I'm uncomfortable and I have to get it out.
Absolutely.
And to have really uncomfortable conversations. Everything from going to the Museum of Apartheid in Johannesburg to, can you love somebody who is Black and still be racist, which you can absolutely be? Can you, sitting with the discomfort and sitting with change and sitting with the way the world is going to go forward and what that means for particular groups of people. Absolutely. It's difficult, and yet it's worthwhile. And I'm glad that, and I mean, if I were having children, I'm glad that that's the partner I have, and I'm glad you have a partner who is willing to. It takes two of you in this way to parent. It's not a competition. It has to happen with you as one united force.
Absolutely, and it makes my job so much easier. And I'll just give a quick example before we go out. Because I was talking with the school, my kid came home saying some things, and so I went to the school and said, hey, this is going on, this is what you need to do. They're like, yeah, that sounds great. Nothing was done. A year later, I was like, the comments are still coming. And so my husband, in his finish, he wrote the email, and then it was like, there was more like response on that side. So it was just like, anyway, it's an ongoing thing, and it's not going to be solved so easily, but just knowing that like he's understanding things in a much deeper way than a year ago, I'm like, okay, cool. So we have an hour and 1 minute and 55 minutes. I just wanted to quickly drop this recommendation. And do you know this book?
No.
Fearing the Black Body, the racial origins
of phobia, of fat
phobia. So this, I think, should be something like recommend reading for all yoga practitioners and teachers, right? Especially if we're talking about like spaces that are welcoming. To be honest, I haven't gotten into it yet because like my husband's like, I'm reading books on trauma and this, and my husband's like, maybe you should have a happy book next. So I think I'm gonna
Terry Pratchett in the middle of all of this. No, seriously, remember.
I think I need to take that up. So.
Because you know what, in the middle of all, if I want to leave on one thing, because as soon as I Googled fearing, what came up was the black body. It automatically came up. I would say to you that the work is never over when we have to just exist. And it's easier for me to say in a black space, even though we do have challenges here. Jamaica isn't by any means perfect. No. But because you exist in a white space, it is difficult. Take care of yourself.
Absolutely.
Remember that boundaries and self-compassion do not fill from an empty cup.
Nope.
Remember to be silly and funny and laugh as much as you can.
I'm going to post about that. I already wrote a post about that, Kira. So go ahead and check it out tomorrow. And the question I'm just going to drop in is, who would, and this was from Sonia Renee Taylor, I think, who would we be if we weren't trying to dismantle white supremacy and patriarchy? So remember the joy of... Kira, thank you so much for coming. This was beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye bye.